Before we begin, a brief note from Rodger Foster. This fireside chat was recorded at Rand Airport before an audience of fellow aviators and aviation enthusiasts at EAA322 Auditorium. The discussion reflects Rodger's personal experiences and perspectives gained over 40 years in aviation, including 33 years as Chief Executive Officer of Airlink. Although Rodger remains a shareholder and non-executive director of Airlink, the views expressed in this recording are entirely his own and are shared in a personal capacity. They do not necessarily represent the views of Airlink, its board, management, shareholders, regulators, or any other organization. The conversation was informal, unscripted, and wide-ranging, and should be viewed in that spirit, a candid reflection on a lifetime in aviation, the lessons learned along the way, and the people and events that helped shape the journey. We thank Rodger for his candor and hope that you will enjoy this discussion as much as we did.
I find this quite intimidating. I'm not used to talking to big wheels like this.
Do I have to stand, Karl?
They're scorning me.
I'm just wondering, do I have to stand because you're not sitting?
No. Okay, I'm just busy introducing you, and then we'll get onto the subject matter. When you see, and I hope this is going to be of great interest. For me, it was tremendous, with Rodger also helping me with the sequence of how we're going to go about this. So, a big welcome to Rodger Foster.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
As Rodger said, we said, are we going to do a presentation? So he said, no, fireside chat. So this is the fireside chat, but no fire, although the fire's in my heart.
So, Karl, I actually wasn't going to bring a nice big thick jacket this morning, and I'm glad I did, because I'm looking for this fire and I don't see it. So, yeah.
Oh, well done, Rodger. Okay, now let's, from the beginning, Rodger, how did you get involved in aviation?
Sure. I don't know if you know what my initials are.
No.
So, Rodger, R, so Romeo, Arnold, Alpha, Foxtrot, Foster. So right from birth, I've had RAF in my life.
That's nice. And it's not called RAF.
No,
RAF.
well, in fact, I had an aircraft RAF as well, so there was one. But, you know, right from a small child, I think it's basically the same affliction that everybody in this room has suffered at some point in time. So I was always keen, you know, drawing pictures of aeroplanes in the grades and whatever. Actually, I did do art as well, but I was never very good at it, so I took Latin instead and I failed that. So,
regular guy.
Yeah. But I had that as a child, model aeroplanes, pictures of aeroplanes and whatever. But of course, you know, there's this affordability issue. And the question is, you know, at what point in your life do you convert the aspiration into reality? And it goes about where's the means. So I worked hard to get to the means, and then I had a lucky break. I was in, you know, I went to university and I went to Metro Cash and Carry, which I think we'll get onto in a bit. But I built my first home and I lived in it for a bit, couldn't afford it. It was at the time where interest rates went from about 4 or 5% to about 24 or 25%. And I suddenly found myself really short of cash. So I put my house on the market, and along came a guy and his wife, Wolfgang Rafalski and Bettina, who I didn't know from a bar of soap. And they walked into the house, walked out again in 5 minutes, and literally 10 minutes later, I had a call from the agent to say, your house has been sold. So I said, okay, all right. But I mean, you know, these people didn't even look at it.
You only need one buyer.
Right. So I made some money out of the house, and then I started building another house, but I took the money and I thought, okay, here's my lucky break. And I went out, and there's a long story here, Keith Matthews, Sean McGovern, a whole bunch of different people that some of you may know. And the advice I got was, get yourself a little aeroplane, but first go for a medical. So I did. I went for a medical. I passed the medical, no problem. And I bought a little Grumman American AA5B, a Tiger, Grumman American Tiger. I don't know if anybody knows the Tiger.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys here have had them.
Yeah, well, I mean, fantastic little aeroplane. And that was really the beginning. So, and it went back to exactly 40 years ago, 1986 is when I started flying.
Before Airlink, you were involved with Metro Cash and Carry and your pal Barry Webb.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that, the Cash and Carry? Which
so I went to university first. I graduated from the Faculty of Architecture in Wits.
Okay.
And
now he graduated as an architect.
Well, actually, I did a Bachelor of Science in Building, so it's a little bit different from architect. Architects are a little bit more airy-fairy. They smoke a lot of dope and that sort of thing. Whereas we were more, the beer drinkers, stand at the pool.
Regular guys.
Yeah. So a little bit more practical than the airy-fairies. And it's kind of borderline civil engineering. It's a blend of a bit of architecture, but it's more, construction, property development orientated. So I did that and then went and did my national service for 2 years. And while I was doing national service, I bumped into a guy called Steve Dickinson. We were in the officers' mess at Auditorium, and we used to go running every day. He lived in Northcliffe, and my family home was in Emerentia at the time. So we were close together, and I used to live with him and vice versa. He had a hell of a lacquer sister. Wow. She was stunning. Sue.
So when you said the beer, and I was going to say, and did you chase women?
So Steve had this sister she was like very magnetic, and I used to drop him off on a Friday evening and make damn sure I got invited into the family home for a beer, so I could try and chat Sue up, sort of thing. Didn't work. But anyway, his father was an architect, Doug Dickinson, and he used to do all of the designs of the Metro Cash and Carry warehouses. So he said to me, listen, wouldn't you like a career? This is when I was finishing my national service at Metro Cash and Carry. So I said, well, I don't know anything about warehouse development, but it is in line with my studies. So he said, I think I've got the perfect fit for you. Go and have an interview with this guy, Barry Webb. Anyway, I rocked up at the interview, but Barry Webb didn't. So he didn't rock up. So I said, okay, fine. I'd been given another offer to go and join Group 5. So I was about to start my first day at work when Barry phoned me and he said, listen, I'm really sorry, my diary got nutsed up completely, but would you like to start today? So I said, but we haven't even had an interview yet. He said, no, Doug's done the interview. You come along and you can start today. So I started Metro Cash and Carry. He employed me, and he was my boss. So my role there was store development. I used to go out, procure pieces of land, get them rezoned, sit with Doug Dickinson, do the architecture, and so on. It's a long story, and I know we only have today. Otherwise, we'd be sleeping here tonight, and you don't have the campfire burning. So I worked at Metro for 2 years with Barry, but I had autonomy. I worked with Lionel Katz and Sergio Martinengo, Sasha Martinengo's dad. I don't know if you all know Sasha, Radio 5, etc. So Sergio was part of the C-suite. There were a bunch of guys in the C-suite. But the other interesting character that I met frequently was Nate Kirsch. Does anybody know that name?
Very, very well.
Right. So Nate Kirsch, yeah. So, and I mean, incredibly, Nate's just done that.
The country's wealthiest man.
Yes.
Right now.
Right now, apart from Elon Musk, who you could still say South African, but Nate is by far the country's biggest wealth at the moment. But yeah, Nate Kirsch, he ran a little business called Kirsch Industries. Aside from that, he was the principal behind Metro Cash and Carry, Kirsch Industries. But he had a little business called KI Air, Kirsch Air. And this is quite fascinating because while I was at Metro Cash and Carry, at that level of seniority, I could command one of the Kirsch Air aircraft. They had a King Air and they also had a little Baron. And just one day, I had a flight to, in those days, Petersburg to go and do the project that I was busy with. And the Kirsch Air Baron broke down. So they called the Progress Air Baron 58, and a guy by the name of Keith Matthews. Keith and I were at school together. And Keith's father owned Progress Area at the time, and he had this Baron. So Keith rocks up, I jump in, he says, come sit in the front. So we used to do swimming training together at school, provincial swimming training and that sort of thing. Anyway, so Keith says, come and sit up front in this Baron. So off we go to Petersburg. We've got the architect in the back and the QS in the back, and he and I are sitting in the front. He's flying this airplane. He said, well, would you like to take over? So I said, okay, but there are no controls on this side here. I said, no problem. Pushes them over to me, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. So the next thing is, here I'm steering this Baron. Of course, know nothing about it. That was the beginning, because Keith, in the end, was one of the instrumental individuals in me getting involved in the AA5B. That you could say started, but you're talking about Barry and Metro. So Barry and I started working together, I think it was around about 79, 80, beginning of 81. And by the way, that's 45 years ago, and we're still in business together today. We were partners for 45 years. We worked together as executives at Metro Cash and Carry, but we left Metro Cash and Carry 2 years after I started, and we formed a business called Foster Webb. His name, my name. Or my name, his name. And Foster Webb started off doing construction activity, and we eventually carried on doing the Metro Cash and Carry type store development on a turnkey basis for Metro Cash and Carry, but not only for Metro Cash and Carry. And we ran that business for about 10, 11 years, and we've prospered. But during that, the Grumman AA5B came along in 1986. And at the time, I was doing road trips to Polokwane, to Klerksdorp, to Jan Kempdorp, to all over the place, Uppington. And suddenly the little Grumman became a vehicle. You know,
a business tool.
A business tool. So out of Lanseria early in the morning, off to Klerksdorp, back again same day, in the office doing tenders and so on. But I very quickly realized that the Grumman was incapable. When I say incapable, fantastic little airplane, but if you're going to use it as a business tool, you need 2 engines, in my view. Maybe a PC-12 is the exception, but you need 2 engines, you need all-weather capability and so on. So at that time, Barry and I, after I had the Grumman, we looked at business need and we said, why don't we buy a Beech Baron 58 into the company? Now, he knew nothing about aviation at that time. He's a chartered accountant. A chartered accountant, how many chartered accountants in the room? I could be careful what I say. Okay, there are a couple. Okay. But be careful about chartered accountants and aeroplanes because it doesn't make sense to them. But I convinced him that it did. And the next thing is we had this Baron, Juliet Papa Mike, which I fetched from Cape Town after I did my CPL. And, that became the vehicle to open the doors, to open up new horizons for Foster Webb Construction. So we were doing Metro Cash and Carry work in places like Uppington, Umtata, Klerksdorp, wherever they wanted a store developed or altered, we would get the job because we had the mobility. We had the air access, which was fascinating.
Right. Now, you spoke about your first experience was in that Beech Baron 58. And I'm not glossing over Barry's involvement because we'll come to that again later. You started off with a Baron, and I remember you had a pretty smart Tiger Moth at Krugersdorp,
right,
which Kevin Hopper said he built for himself, but you took it from him.
Oh, I think we have slightly different versions.
Okay, all right.
So that Tiger Moth was my second Tiger Moth. I had one first before that, and that is a story. It's an embarrassing story. So we won't go to the first Tiger Moth.
No, but it was a beautiful airplane.
The one that, well, Kevin, funnily enough, did both of them. He built both of them. But G Arms, which is Zulu Uniform X-Ray Romeo Foxtrot, the one that you're referring to, that has a fascinating history. I mean, it flew out here with a guy by the name of Paget Bellin.
I know Paget Bellin.
Maybe I said his name incorrectly. I don't know the full story because I wasn't part of it, but he flew from London to Cape Town in that aeroplane in 1961. And when he accomplished his mission, he was then going to fly from Cape Town to Pietermaritzburg, where he had family. And he got as far as George and was doing some stupid heroics and ended up, and I think, Jeff told me the story of his nosing over. G-arms nosed over as well on landing. I don't know what it was, but bottom line is he basically trashed the aeroplane in George. And that's not the George that's there today. This is the old George aerodrome. So the aircraft stayed in the back of a barn, apparently, until somewhere around about 1996, 1997, somewhere around there. And then it came up to Johannesburg, and it ended up at the back of Kevin Hopper's hangar. And I used to have my white tiger moth with Kevin. One day I was walking through the hangar, and I said to him, "What's all this junk lying in the back under a pile of dust?" And he said, "That's a project." So I said, "Okay, what kind of project is it? It looks like a tiger moth." And he said, "It is a tiger moth, and he is going to do this project for himself. This is going to be his fantastic aeroplane for himself. He's going to put all the effort into it." So about 2 or 3 years later, I was in the hangar, and I said, "You know, this pile of junk lying at the back here, this project of yours is still lying at the back of the hangar. When are you going to get on with it?" And he said, "Well, I just don't have the ammo at the moment." So I said, "Well, you know, what about a partnership?" And he said, "Okay, that sounds like it makes sense." And we went into this venture. He was going to do the labor. I was going to do the procurement of all of the bits and pieces, engine components, the spare fuel tank, flying wires, all of it. And we went into this joint venture, and about literally 6 months into the joint venture, we hadn't got very far. He said he actually needs to liberate his cash out of it. Will I buy him out? So I said, "Fine, okay." And he carried on building. I think that project took 2.5 years, and I think we finished it around about 2001, 2002. And he did a magnificent job. Not on his own. If you have a look at the cowling on that aircraft, it's pure L-clad. And if you have a look at the nose bowl, it's pure L-clad, rolled on multiple English wheels in 4 pieces and welded together, and you can't see the welding at all. And that was done by a guy who used to work for the old Bop Air at Joburg International Airport. He did that for me as a favor. And you will not find another tiger moth with a nose bowl and cowlings like
polished like that. I understand about polishing airplanes.
I know about elbow grease.
Yeah.
This is elbow grease. Ask Maury. She saw it.
Yeah, but
sometimes fingers black with polish and rags and whatever. So it took a lot of labor of love.
2 days to get it off.
Something like
I
that.
do it regularly on my little fire trap.
Autosol, I think they call it. And away you go.
All right. Roger, just on Kevin Hopper, I walked into the place there, and there was a Cessna 172 RG retractable gear, and in pieces with a November registration. And I said, "And so you got a November?" He's qualified. So he said, "No, he's rebuilding it for Rodger Foster's daughter, Michaela."
Yep.
And so I said, "Oh, that's nice." So he said, "No, Roger had said if she can get a commercial pilot's license subjects, he'll buy her an airplane," and that was it. Absolutely fantastic. That's a story that he gave me.
Okay. Again, slightly different version.
I expected that.
So I never bought an airplane for my daughter, but I did buy an airplane for my daughter to learn to fly in. Okay, and it wasn't about the CPL subjects. She first had to graduate with any B degree. She always wanted to fly, right from when she was 3 years old. In fact, a funny story, when she was in playgroup, and bear in mind, I mean, she was practically born in an aeroplane, but when she was in playgroup, they had one of these fancy dress parties at the playgroup. So she comes home and she told her mom, "I want to go as a pirate." So her mom made a nice pirate hat, skull and crossbones, gave her a little saber, and off she went, a very, very unhappy little girl dressed up as a pirate. I turned around to her and I said, "But Mex, what's wrong? I mean, you wanted to go to this fancy dress as a pirate." She said, "No, I want to be a pirate. I don't want to be a pirate. I want to be a pirate." So I said, "What do you mean pirate?" "Pirate flying airplanes, pirate flying airplanes," yeah. So, I mean, it goes back right to the very beginning. In fact, when she was an infant, and maybe James might recognize this or remember it, I think it was around about 1994. somewhere around there, 93. We had our ATRs, and we took one of the ATR down to Margate Air Show. And Michaela was in a pram. So, I mean, right back to that kind of
good
age.
start, yeah.
Yeah. But you asked the question about the little RG. So she'd got her BCom, and then I said to her, right, what we'll do is, you carry on with your PPL and then your CPL subjects, and for every subject you do, you can have so many hours and in the little RG. So, and it made sense to buy an aircraft and own it for her to carry on and build hours. So she went from nothing to, I don't know, about 170 when she tested for her BCom, not her BCom, her compilot license with IFR. And she did that with Jannie Lutzes out at Vonnegut. And that was a fantastic beginning for her. But the little RG, which Kevin rebuilt, actually came from Dudley, funnily enough. And it was parked at Lanseria for quite a while. And I said, look, let's rescue this airplane. Here's an application for it. And we kept it on the November register, 701 Romeo Victor, if I remember correctly. You might remember, Maury. But it was a great beginning for Michaela because it was manageable as a 172, but versatile, being, variable pitch, retractable gear. And I put really nice instrumentation in it so that she could do GNSS approaches and all that sort of thing. So it was great. And we spent some fantastic quality time together because she used to call me and say, Dad, will you come and fly with me? Of course, I'll never ever turn down that opportunity. So I became George and sat in the right-hand seat while she was busy with her paperwork and navigation and whatever. And we had some fantastic times. One very memorable was we got up very early one morning on a Saturday out of Krugersdorp, and we headed to Uppington. Now, if you know, from Krugersdorp to Uppington in a 172, even an RG, takes about a day. And then, you get there late morning. You've got to turn around and you've got to come back again. And that was interesting. So we landed and the temperatures were already in the 40s. Refueled the aircraft, rushed into the little canteen in Uppington, bought a cappuccino and a takeaway and a toasted salmi, climbed back in the aircraft, started, and I was sitting in the right-hand seat watching the cylinder head temperature. So she's taxiing to the holding point, starts doing her run-ups, and I said, Max, abbreviate your run-up. No, must do a full run-up, Dad. So I said, Mac, what's your cylinder head temperature? You're going to do run-ups here? That cylinder head temperature is going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to take off. Abbreviate. So she did. How many people have been in and out of Uppington? So miles and miles of runway. And at 40 plus, I don't know, I don't want to say it was 45, but at 40 plus in a little 172 RG, which needs a lot of runway anyway, you're using the kind of runway that a Boeing 747 would take. Yeah. And eventually this aircraft gets airborne and we start this climb, but it's gradual, and I'm watching the cylinder head temperature. And I said to her, Mick, you need to tap off a little bit. And she says, no, we've got to climb. So I said, Mick, you're not going to climb with a dead engine. I can tell you right now, the cylinder head temperature is running. Tap off. So she taps off, and of course at that heat the aircraft starts to sink. We found dark patches on these desert dunes, and they throw this hot air into the sky in a thermal. So we just coincidentally went over one, and you suddenly feel this bump, boom, and the aircraft jumps 50 feet or 100 feet. And then you find another one, another 100 feet. And so we navigated dark patch to dark patch, and eventually got into cooler air, and the aircraft could carry on climbing, take a bit more power and that sort of thing. That was fascinating, and if you ask her about her flying experiences, that was probably one of the best learning experiences she could ever have, because it went about, this is not just aviate and navigate and communicate. This is about, you also have to do engine management and everything else, So it was, so it was a good experience there.
Fantastic. That November registration on Michaela's airplane, was there a reason that you kept it on the November registration?
So it's no longer on the November register. For me it was always about the management of the aircraft maintenance, etc. And you could get certain individuals who could work on N-registered aircraft. And you were immunized from things like engine overhauls prematurely, etc., propeller overhauls prematurely. That was
12-year rule.
The 12-year rule, yeah. Despite that, when I bought the aircraft from Dudley and put it with Kevin, we did a full engine overhaul, full propeller overhaul. In fact, we refurbished the whole aeroplane, stripped it down to bare metal, last nuts and bolts and rivets and whatever, stripped out the interior, and we rebuilt the whole airplane. It was a fantastic exercise. But I kept it on the N register more from the perspective of managing it with sanity as opposed to compliance bedonnerd, if I could use that term. So I kept it in a trust based in the Bahamas or something like that, managed by a trust manager in the States, and that's typically how a lot of American registered aircraft are owned and managed. So
there's one of our guys here who has one
yeah.
as well.
And you know, the interesting thing is she could learn and do all of her training on that aircraft without the aircraft being enrolled in any one of the flying schools, because she was the owner of the aircraft. So we got around a whole lot of little things. You know, all the rest of my aircraft were all Zulu Sierra or Zulu uniform. But that particular one, also because I thought that at some point in time we may sell it offshore as opposed to keeping it here. It now resides at the Stellenbosch Flying Club. That's where it is. Yeah, and it's on ZS register. They moved it.
Okay, they're very interesting. Now, Rodger, how did Airlink come about?
So we spoke about Barry and I and the Foster Webb business. And Foster Webb was really primarily a construction business, but we bought an aircraft initially, the Beach Baron, into Foster Webb. I had the Grumman American Tiger, so we had, you know, Foster Webb was partnership. It was 50-50 partnership, Barry and I. The Baron became quite interesting to the various charter operators, Progress Air, Air 2000, Speed Air, I can name all of them at Lanseria. And they would ask if they could use the Baron, and I put my hand up as well and say, I'm happy to do the odd charter. And the Baron ended up flying to the Okavango swamps with me, to the Tule Block, Tule Lodge, Mashatu, all of the destinations, Kugana, Kakaba, Kwai River, Savuti, Chobe, etc. And it became quite a regular thing. But we also needed the aircraft in Foster Webb. So a trip to Uppington, and we found that sometimes the charter needs competed with our own needs. So we bought another airplane. We bought a Cessna 414. And the same thing happened. Cessna 414 started becoming popular with the charter operators. And so we thought, okay, fine, this is interesting. Being in property development and construction, we needed hangarage for these aircraft. And I saw some vacant land at Lanseria, and I went off to the Lanseria management. And I said, listen, what about that vacant land? They said, well, there's no infrastructure there. So I said, well, we can put the infrastructure in. We could put sewage infrastructure, we could put water reticulation, fire hydrant reticulation, electrical reticulation, and we can pave it. We can do all of it. We can retain it with retaining blocks. So the old Foster Webb hangar development, 8,500 square meters of hangars and so on, we built that at Lanseria. And it was just like a little venture, really. But it became the home of Foster Webb Aviation as a maintenance business, and then Foster Webb Air Charter. With our airplanes, we applied for air services licenses at the Licensing Council, and we got them, and so this business grew. We had, if I remember, 21 hangars, 2,400 square meters, and the 21st hangar was about a 550 square meter hangar, and that was the complex. And we sold some of the hangars off just so that we could defray some of the debt and make the debt to equity ratio manageable in terms of the repayment of the debt. And then we let out the space in the hangars, and we managed aircraft, and those aircraft joined the charter fleet and all became available for sale. So we started an aircraft brokerage business, aircraft sales business, and so this business grew. Whilst we were doing that, there was a need to supply ACMI type activity to various other air services providers. One was Transky Airways. In fact, I used to fly the Transkei Airways Sunday flight in a King Air myself. And then, of course, the other one was Link Airways. Now, Link Airways had a background. It went back to low-felt air services on the one hand. It was the one route of Link. And then there was an amalgamation between low-felt air services, which became Magnum, and Border Air and City Air. And they came together around about 1988, 1989, and they formed a business called Link Airways. Okay? And Link operated a bunch of Piper Chieftains and some Metroliners. Every now and then, when they had aircraft maintenance issues, they would call on Foster Webb to supply airlift, which we did. And then around about the beginning of 1992, they owed us a lot of money, and they put themselves into administration. No, I mean, owed us a lot of money. There was a few R100,000 at the time, but a few R100,000 is probably a lot of money today. I wouldn't like to actually extrapolate it and see what it is, but so in owing us money, we were on the list of creditors, and there was a guy by the name of Campbell Alexander from a law company called Cox Yates, based in Durban. Campbell and I were in the same barrack doing our basic training, national service. And, you know, you become barrack buddies, you know, bungalow buddies, whatever. And, you know, he saw my name on the list, Foster Webb. So he called me and he said, "Rodger, is this you?" So I said, "Yep." He said, "Well, I've got bad news for you. You're not going to get anything out of this. But let's sit down and let's talk about maybe you buy the business over. You're in aviation." So I said, "Well, we're not in the airline business." He said, "But okay, you're in aviation. Come and have a look at it." So Barry and I sat down and we spoke to the administrator and to the lawyer, Campbell Alexander, and we reached a number that made sense. So they said, "Put in a bid," and we did, and we were successful. And of course, at the time, we had this thriving construction business, and that had mergers and acquisitions over its history. And there were two junior partners, a guy by the name of Henry Zrzinski, who ran a business called Fleet Construction, and a guy who was at university with me by the name of Neil Hume, who had a business called Hume Civils. We'd merged those two businesses, and both of those were junior shareholders. And there was a guy by the name of Keith Elgie, who came from LTA, and he'd bought into Foster Webb at a point, and we did a management buyout with those guys, and Barry and I went off into this business that we knew absolutely sweet nothing about, and that was Link Airways. There were two partners that we brought, John Morrison, is a name that most people in aviation and the airline business know. John and Jan. So John became a junior partner in the beginning, and a guy by the name of Dave White, who'd come from the City Air side of the business. So they were both junior shareholders, but we quickly realized that everybody had different ideas. They were the experts, we knew nothing, but we had the capital in the business. So the quickest way to really learn about any business, but running an airline business, is have your skin in the game. So we bought those two juniors out very early. They weren't even there for 3 months. So it was just Barry and I, and we knew nothing. Barry's a chartered accountant, and I knew nothing about running an airline either. But we gave up the construction business to commit 100% fully, entirely to the airline. And we renamed it Airlink. We had literally 2 serviceable Metroliners and 1 or 2 serviceable Piper Chieftains. And then we brought some of the aircraft that we had in the Foster Webb fleet. Mike Sierra Golf was the King Air B100 that we had. Mike Zulu Sierra, another King Air B100. And some other aircraft that we had within our hangar complex.
When did the ATRs you mentioned?
The first ones came in December in 1992. So this was, we did the deal with the liquidator, administrator, and the lawyer around about March, April. We got involved in the management of it in May, and from the 1st of June 1992, we were it. Our skin in the game, our business, and we ran the business from there. So right at the very onset of our involvement in it, we thought, well, you know, where are we going to take this business to? We don't like these Metroliners and Piper Chieftains. We need to get involved in a more holistic way. So that's where the ATRs came in. But that was on the advice of the Mike Myberg team. A guy by the name of Cecil Harding, you might remember, looked after the scheduling and network planning at SAA. Mike, I walked through the door and I said to Mike, "Listen, this is who we are. Liberalization of the skies at the time. It had just happened. And we thought, well, if we're going to get into this business, we're going to get in properly. So let's go and talk to SAA. So we spoke to Mike and he said, go and talk to Cecil Harding and he'll help you with network and scheduling in terms of identification of gaps where SAA was too big to go to those markets, like the Margates and the Pietermaritzburgs and so on. Yeah, well, they used to operate at Vryheid at the time. Magnum used to operate at Vryheid. Yeah, we decided not Vryheid anymore because there were a bunch of reasons why. Well, we didn't get as far as Vryheid, but those were the kind of routes that we were doing at Link, and then we tried to rationalize the schedule to make sense of it. So we kept Pietermaritzburg, kept Nelspruit, kept Polokwane, Petersburg at the time, kept Bloemfontein, but we dropped off the stuff that didn't make as much sense. And we started getting the business into sense and sensibility from a viability perspective, from a profitability. Then we got into the ATRs, and that we got 2 ATRs in December in 1992, and we put them on Richards Bay, Pietermaritzburg, Margate, and 1 or 2 other routes, Bloemfontein.
I'm getting a bit worried here because because I know that none of you are going to pass the exam that we're going to get on this later on. But it's extremely complex how this has all come together, and so successfully. But as you said, your skin was in it.
Yeah, very much so. And if I look back in the history, and I said we don't have enough time to go through the full story because it's a long story. But cut it short, we realized we had to work with SAA. We wanted to work with SAA, and it was a very different SAA with Mike Myburg. In fact, even going back to Gert van der Veer, who we also had interaction with, and he'd already stepped out and Mike had taken over. What a fantastic management team SAA had at the time. And it's a pity that they didn't survive the politics, unfortunately, because they were good people, all of them, and clever people as well. John Hare, who you probably still know. So in realizing that we needed to work with them, it came to us as quite a shock when SA Express came onto the scene. And when they came onto the scene as franchisees of South African Airways. We were just aligned. We were in the SAA Safari booking system. And we were working with SAA on scheduling coordination, on interlining and all of that sort of thing. And then the next thing is, here comes the first hurdle, SA Express. Now what do you do? SA Express arrived with, I think, 8 de Havilland 300Bs. And here we were busy accumulating a fleet of ATRs. I don't know if anybody remembers Flightstar. So Jochie van Woerten and the de Meulenaar family and Safran were the partners of Flightstar. And Jan Blake was the chief executive and Glyn Norkier was the head of commercial. So literally, when SA announced that SA Express was the chosen child, sorry for you Airlink, we went off and we sat down with the shareholders and the executive leadership of Flightstar. Now you might remember that Flightstar had 2 ATR 72s. So the first thing that happened is we committed to the ATR 72s and we went off to ATR and we got 2 more ATRs. And while I was in Toulouse with a guy by the name of Henri Paul Puel, who was the chief executive of ATR at the time, I had a call from Jan Blake. It was on a Friday afternoon. He said, Roger, don't sign for any more ATRs. I said, Jan, we can't operate just the 4. We need more if we're going to take these guys on meaningfully. And that would have been Airlink aligning with Flightstar. He said, I can't tell you over the phone. When are you flying back? I said, I'm actually leaving Toulouse now. He said, go back and cancel the deal. Tell them to tear up the paper. I said, I can't. It's done. The deal is done. You don't do that. He said, I'll meet you at the airport off your flight tomorrow morning. And he did. And he said, Flightstar is closing today. So I said, what do you mean? Now, Flightstar had battled from a financial point of view. And what the owners of Flightstar did is they went off to the government and they said, look, there's antitrust. And we don't have antitrust legislation in this country yet, but there's international antitrust law. There's antitrust that has been at play here. You need to fix this. So government said, right, South African Airways will buy out Flightstar, which it did. And this is in 1994. So it was bought out and literally closed the next day. And in the meantime, we had signed up this alliance to work together with Flightstar. And we suddenly found ourselves up a creek without a paddle. No more Flightstar as a partner. And all these ATRs. So we went back to SA and we said, look, guys, this is not kosher. This is private money. And we were encouraged to participate because we're in a liberalized sky environment. So where do we go to from here? And they said, well, let's sit around the table and we talk to the people, the Deluces and so on, from SA Express, and let's see if we can't find space for a 3-tier system, South African Airways, Express, and then Airlink can come in under it. And we did that. It was very difficult because we had to get out of the ATRs and choose a smaller module, which we did in the form of the Jetstream 41. Jetstream 41, we could have gone Beach 1900, we could have gone Dornier 328, but we decided on the Jetstream because it ran at more or less the same cost as a Beach 1900, but it had 29 seats instead of 19, and it had a toilet, and it had a galley. So we thought that would be a good vehicle, and we climbed into that in 1995, and we built up a fleet ultimately of 16 of those airplanes, taking on all of the entry-level markets, the markets that nobody else wanted to tackle, like the Pietermaritzburgs and so on and so forth. And we built a really strong, viable business based on frequency of services, availability at the right time of the day to provide services to the consumer. And at the same time, we looked after the viability and we looked after the balance sheet of the business. And we built up something which became robust.
Absolutely. I had no idea that it was so complex. Didn't Her Majesty come and present you the first Jetstream?
Now you talk about Michaela. Michaela actually handed Her Majesty the mouthful of jelly tots so that she'd shut up. But she was two and a bit years old.
That's what Mari's trying to do to me.
Yeah. So 2 and a bit years old at Grand Central Airport, Queen Elizabeth handed over the first Jetstreams.
Absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And Prince Philip was there with her. What's the Duke of Edinburgh?
Yes.
Is it? Yeah. He was there with her. Doesn't say much. Walks in her shadow. Anyway, but,
2 steps behind.
2 steps behind all the time.
Same in my house.
Yeah. So that was fascinating. Yeah, that was good. I think the Jetstreams became the backbone of the business, and it built that strength in Airlink. It built the robustness in it. But yes, you're right, 100% correct.
On the Jetstreams, that's where your logo came in, with the hummingbird on the flag.
So the first step of it was the alignment of the Airlink livery with South African Airways, and that was on the Jetstream. So you'll see that there was orange on the tail, flashes of white, and a blue fuselage, as opposed to the white fuselage. And it was just to modernize what was happening there. You'll note that Airlink became a franchisee of South African Airways in 1997, in April 1997, and then all the Jetstreams adopted the new South African Airways rainbow tail livery together with SA Express. We became a team, and you could see it by alignment of everything. We were 100% South African Airlink, small name at the bottom of it. South African Airways was South African, didn't say Airways. In fact, I think it did. South African Airways, South African Express. And we really worked well together, and that was under Mike Meyerberg's leadership. It was fantastic. Israel's Kasana was my counterpart at SA Express. Straight up and down guy, what you see is what you get. No political bullshit. It was just really fantastic business acumen and sense and sensibility. So we joined the alliance and became franchisee and threw our all into it. And things were looking really, really good at that time for all of us. SAA, of course, just not even a year later, Mike Meyerberg was marched out along Cam Coleman Andrews, and he stripped out 290 million rands of SAA, put it into his own pocket. It's another story altogether. But that's where things fell apart after Mike Meyerberg left, because from there on you had political leader after political leader after political leader, and you never had anybody who had any business sense inside South African Airways. I mean, there's a book to be written about how many, the number of years that I was the CEO of Airlink, there were more CEOs in SAA than I had years of CEOs at Airlink. So if I had 34 years as the CEO of, not quite 34, 33, as the CEO of Airlink, there were more than 33 leaders at SAA in the same period of time.
Destroyers. Just this Coleman Andrews, of course, in the airline, he was known as Aeskas Andries. He was employed by a fellow called Saki Makazoma. Saki Makazoma was when Transnet became, he became the head of that, and SAA Harbours and all that fell under that grip. And Saki Makazoma got this Coleman Andrews in because he had just rescued, I think it was Continental Airlines in the States that were about to go bust. And he went in, or he didn't do it, but somebody, Methuen was the guy's name, and he wrote a book From Worst to First, how he rescued Continental, which is still a very viable outfit, massive. And Coleman Andrews came along, and he used to get us, or the flight ops people, together about once a month and tell us what was going on. And you could actually read the Methuen book From Worst to First, page 28. Next time it'll be page 36. And he ran it exactly like that. And then the state, or politically, they said that Makazoma had employed this guy outside of his authority. And so Coleman Andrews was given a push. But he was employed, he took Airways and sold off all the silverware. He sold off all the airplanes to the banks. And that we would lease them, or the airline would lease them back at a very low rate and an increasing steeply at the end. But that was timed for when Coleman Andrews left. So it was a very shifty deal. The government saw through this lot and they sent Coleman on his way. But he still had 2 years to run on his contract. And he pulled out 272 million rand in punishment, or for the end of his contract.
Severance, yeah.
Yeah.
Slightly different, the facts that I understand. I worked with Coleman and his team, and
he was a nice guy.
Okay. Worked with him.
It was different, yeah.
Yeah, and were they competent? He had some very clever heads in his team, and the one thing that he did do is he came up with a vision and a strategy for South African Airways and Express and Airlink and other international partners. And what he did with the fleet was about liquidity, because SAA didn't have cash. And he had to do that. He had to sell out the family jewels to raise capital. I think all of that was plausible at the time. And then he got into Boeings as opposed to the Airbus. So he did a big Boeing deal, and the Airbuses were eliminated, and then things went awry with the parent, which was Transnet at the time under Mafika Mkonazi, whose chair was Saki Makazoma, and Jeff Radebe was the minister that was responsible for them. What they didn't recognize is that Coleman's paycheck was determined on the basis of turnaround profit share. And he had a big number of the turnaround profit. I think it was something like 20% of the turnaround profit. So what the parent understood with turnaround profit is if the company makes a profit, then he'll share in it. But turnaround profit by definition is if it's making a loss of 1 billion and he makes it make a loss of 500 million, there's a 500 million turnaround profit, and he would share in that. So he said, here's my invoice, 272 million. And they said, but this company is not profitable. He said, yeah, but my commission is based on turnaround profit. They didn't have a choice, it was contractual. So,
Sure.
So they said, there's your check, now there's the door, get out of here.
And
they kicked him out.
I understood that amount was 2.6 billion. So, no, that was rands, and so he got 260 million out of that lot.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And that was his share of the turnaround profit, so it must have been 10%.
And
yeah.
it seemed to be working so well
Yeah.
until this happened, until
Yeah.
Saki Makazoma was fired.
Mm.
And of course, the collapse followed that. But Rodger, at the same time, it was a little, quite a bit later, that COVID came along. First the World Trade Center, then along came COVID straight after that. And the airline owed you 400 million, I understand, from your, I think it was a ticketing arrangement.
So the franchise system was all of our inventory, being seats in every flight for the year in advance, would be sold through the SAA booking system. And this goes back in time, because when we joined the franchise system in 1997, it was a system called Safari. And then they changed to the Swissair system. You might remember that Swiss became a shareholder in South African Airways in the late 1990s, before 9/11 happened. They were 15% shareholder of South African Airways. And one of the deals that they did is SAA moved out of its own booking system into a system called Axres, which was owned by Swissair. And then Swissair went bust just after 9/11 happened. I think they shut their doors in the December of 2001, 2001, I think it was, yeah. So from that time on, all of our ticket sales went through the South African Airways system. So they'd first receive our cash. Bear in mind, the liability for flight was always associated to the cash associated with the ticket. So you sell a ticket which hasn't been flown, the cash has to sit somewhere. So the cash is an asset, and there's a liability which contras the asset, and that's the liability to fly out the ticket. Until the ticket has been flown out, then the cash comes to revenue. So SAA, from a securitization perspective, held on to all of that cash, which is fair. That's how franchise systems work, okay? Now, SAA over time deteriorated. Its viability was not there. Its debt burden got bigger and bigger, until servicing the debt burden basically spoke for just about all of the revenue. And it went into a spiral dive, and it couldn't get out of it. We realized that in 2014 already. So I went off in 2014 and had a meeting at the Ministry of Finance, and said, look guys, this is the situation. SAA sits on our money. It's our money, but they sit on it, but they don't have the balance sheet, they don't have the cash to pay us our money back. What are you doing about it as the shareholder? Oh, no, we mustn't be worried. South African Airways is very important strategically to the company, to the country, and they'll never, as a government, allow it to fail. So go back to SAA, go to the financial director of SAA, and sit down and work things out, but let them release your money to you over time. Do a scheme of arrangement. So we really started doing that, but as a board, we looked at it and we said, guys, what happens if this thing goes pear-shaped? If it goes, belly up? Let's make sure that we've got a proper contingency plan. So we put the contingency entailed our own booking system, bearing in mind we were in the SAA booking system. And, we had to go out to the market and see it. So there's Sabre, and there was Amadeus, and there was Travelport, all of these big international global distribution computerized reservation systems, and we had to adjudicate which one. We chose Amadeus because if you have a look at the distribution of Amadeus amongst the airlines and travel agents in Europe, it's much bigger than Sabre is in Europe. Sabre is bigger in America. America is an important market to us, but not as important as the European market. So we decided to go with Sabre. But that exercise took us several years. And we were finally fully implemented with the Amadeus system, ready to switch it on by July 2019. But all along, we'd been working with the SAA Finance Department, making sure that we got our money out of it. And then, of course, once we put the system in place by July 2019, we went off to SAA and we said, guys, look, we are very worried about your precarious situation. Things are not getting better, and government doesn't seem to want to recapitalize you with equity, but rather encourage you to get into more debt, which you can't afford. We looked at the numbers, and there's just no ways they could. So we said, we want to change the model. We want to go back to a code share model where we become the custodians of our own cash. And SAA said, we can't let you go out of the franchise because we can't afford to pay you out of the franchise. We can't release your money because we don't have your money. It's just not there. And back to government again, back to the board of SAA, and we said, guys, listen, we're worried. Are you about to go into business rescue? You might remember Solidarity threatened to put them into business rescue. We were worried about that threat. Sat down with the board in November 2019, and we did a whole presentation about why we wanted to change, and we gave them a 5-point, 5-option plan of how to bring about the change so that it wouldn't compromise South African Airways. And they said, leave it with us for a few weeks. Within that few weeks, on the 5th of December 2019, SAA went into business rescue. And you say 400 million. 400 million sounds like a lot of money. Try 890 million. 890 million. And then, of course, we said, okay, fine, let's sit down. We worked with a business rescue practitioner, and there was just no prospect. We put SAA on notice, on terms, to deliver our money. They couldn't because they didn't have it. So we filed to terminate the relationship, jettisoned the franchise system, activated our own booking system, which, had we not had that contingency plan, we would have been dead and buried right there. But we were able to activate it. And then you talk about COVID. So 890 million short from a cash flow point of view. And I mean, there's a whole lot of repercussions that follow from this. But 890 million short in your cash flow, now we have to reinvent the business in a new booking system. And we started doing that. 27th of March, lockdown, COVID lockdown. What do? I'll tell you, it was like staring down the barrel. Yeah, exactly that. But, at the same time, you send everybody home, and it becomes very emotional because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The streets are empty. There's no cars on the road. All businesses are shut down, and you don't know where you're going. And then, you think about it for a day or maybe two, and then you think, we can't do nothing. Let's start doing so. So the first thing you do is you issue yourself a permit, because you're the chief executive. You issue yourself a permit to go to work. So you go and you rock up at the office, and then you issue your financial director. He comes, your commercial person. And so we started bringing a team of individuals together and used the lockdown as like a respite to reinvent the business and think about what our purpose was. We were in Amadeus, which is a global distribution system, which has a propensity for facilitation of interline commercial relationships with other airlines. So, we sat together as a team, and we crafted scenario after scenario, and we came up with plans for each of those scenarios, almost infinite number of scenarios, because you don't know what the heck's going to happen the next day. One of the things that we determined is we decided who we were. Airlink is what it is today. But that was crafted at that time, after hours and hours of soul searching. But the first thing that we decided was, guys, we must be ready as an organization. I don't know how many people have been in the Airlink Training Center at Tambo International. I think you've been there, Karl, no? So anybody who has been there, the guy at the back, he's been there a lot. He probably goes in there. They have to keep on training him. He does training as well there. But if you've been in and out of that training center, that place was a buzz of activity through COVID. We kept our pilots current, our flight attendants current, kept our engineering staff current. We kept a number of aircraft not mothballed. We kept them current, ready to go back into the flight line. And the moment the lockdown easing happens, we were the first movers in there. SAA was crippled because it was in bankruptcy protection, in business rescue. And the others didn't have the means to be able to mobilize themselves. That readiness was one of the best strategic decisions that we made in Airlink. Express closed during COVID. So what COVID did. Now, so COVID became a watershed. The industry was in dire straits before COVID, as exemplified by the fact that South African Airways, which was the lead of the industry, was completely hopelessly bankrupt. And that was already before COVID. So SAA went into business rescue 2019 December. But the rest of the industry was also in trouble. What COVID did is it created the watershed. It basically said, anybody who's still got liquidity and cash in a balance sheet, maybe you can survive. But have a look at what happened. SA Express didn't have a balance sheet. They had just received a bailout of $1.5 billion from government, which was squandered. It just really plugged a hole. in essence. Comair went into business rescue because of it, because they didn't have liquidity and they had massive debt burdens. In fact, their debt to equity ratio at the time was 7. 7 debt to equity because of the Boeings that they'd just taken. And Mango had big debt with South African Airways. SAA couldn't service that debt. Of course, Mango couldn't raise any cash against the debt situation that it had. They went into business rescue. So the whole industry, excepting for SAFAir and Semair and Airlink, the rest of the industry all went into business rescue. And the only survivor out of business rescue was South African Airways. All the rest succumbed. They didn't last. Same thing with Air Namibia, by the way. So, I mean, Air Namibia was also part of the South African or Southern African industry. They also went into business rescue and subsequently went into liquidation.
Rodger, this is so complex. I'd like to move on to us to move on to some of the operational challenges that you had besides the management, which was obviously absolutely severe. That you'd had incidents and how you dealt with incidents and, with nightmares across border and how you rescued yourself from that.
Yeah, I think that, incidents are always there to test you. And I think the Merebank jet stream was probably the start of a whole sequence of a focus on risk management and safety management. That was on the 27th of September in 2009. And you may recall that there were a bunch of jet stream related, they were not incidents really, but because of what happened at Merebank, they became incidents. The one was one of the nose steering systems in Cape Town went off the rack, off the steering rack. And you can't carry on controlling the airplane. This was on taxi, by the way, so taxiing off its parking spot. So that was declared as an incident. And then we had a brake asymmetry. It might have been a thrust asymmetry. I'm not altogether sure, in Port Elizabeth with the Jetstream 41, and it went one wheel off the runway, but nothing happened. That was declared an incident. So suddenly all of these things started accumulating. And then we had another near catastrophe with an aquaplaning event after the fog spray at George Airport, and the first rains after the fog spray. I think that was around about the 8th or the 9th of December 2009, and that really started a domino effect with the CAA. I happened to be in the CAA audit opening at the time at OR Tambo in the maintenance function, and the next thing is I pick up a telephone call, and you've had this runway excursion at George, nobody hurt, but you've had this runway excursion at George. And it changed the nature of the CAA audit completely. Suddenly it was a witch hunt. And, I have to tell you that, you might remember some of the names. Colin was there at the time. And I can't remember, the head of flight operations at SAA was also at the CAA was also ex-SAA. I'll think of his name in a second, but Colin was the head of
Colin
the CAA.
Jordan.
Colin Jordan, yeah. And so I had a telephone call from them to say, listen, you come to this audit close, but bring your lawyer. So I thought, okay, that doesn't sound very good. It's ominous. And it was hectic. It was on the Friday afternoon. The audit close was scheduled for Friday morning. It didn't happen. But Friday afternoon at around about 4 o'clock, now you're sitting in the main boardroom of the CAA, and the message to you is they're going to shut you down. So you look and you say, well, okay. And then they come up with 10 major findings. And does anybody remember the name Karl Gregor?
Yeah, sure.
Right, so Karl was our inspector. And when we had the jet streams, we developed, together with the OEM, a maintenance program that for line maintenance, we didn't take the aircraft out of the line. So line maintenance we could do over 2 or 3 consecutive nights in your AMO facility. So it would go in, and this is before any due maintenance became absolutely due. So a few days before any due maintenance became due, you started the sequence. And every day you put the aircraft back into the flight line, airworthy, with everything that had to be done by that time done. So anyway, that was how the maintenance protocol worked. So they raised that as a major finding. They said, you can't do that. Because once you put your aircraft into maintenance, it's now not airworthy anymore. We say, well, hang on a second, we certify the aircraft airworthy, not you. This is line maintenance. And this is how it works. I said, but where's the approved manual? So you go and you have, here's the manual, stamped by the CAA. There's the approval letter, stamped by the CAA, signed by Karl Jensen. And they said, that's fraud. You forged his signature. I said, no, he signed it. So they raised that, they had 10 of those. Anyway, the bottom line is this meeting went on until about 8 o'clock at night. Came up with the 10 findings, got in my car, phoned my executive leadership group. We're having an EXCO meeting in the main boardroom now. Let's be there at 9 o'clock. Looked at all of these findings, and the end message that came from the CAA was, give us reasons why not to shut you down. These are the findings. And they were all nebulous nothings, all exactly along the lines of the example I've just given you now. We sat through it. Friday night, didn't go home, didn't go to sleep. Saturday, worked the whole day. I called Barry up. He lives in, or lived at the time, in his St. Francis home. Called him, Barry, got to come and help. Got Dries Vima, I think his name was, James. Yeah, he came along, and he was part of the team to work through this. If there were findings which we didn't agree with, we didn't want to fight the CAA. We just said, you know what, guys, we're going to put new procedures in place to circumnavigate all of those issues. 9 o'clock on the Monday morning was the meeting with the CAA, and I went in there, I could hardly speak. I hadn't slept since Thursday. And I said, here are all your findings. That's the corrective plan. It is implemented. Not, here's the corrective plan. We've got 21 days to put the corrective action plan in place. It is implemented. Klaar gelag, done and dusted. Go and check. And they couldn't stop it. But then, on the 23rd of December, I had just gone on leave. 23rd of December, we had one of the jet streams blow a rear turbine seal. As takeoff thrust happened, rear turbine seal, smoke, oil pressure fluctuation. Captain said, we're going back. Didn't start the takeoff roll, just taxied back, parked the aircraft. And the next thing is, Colin Jordan had climbed an airplane. He was going off to the States on his annual vacation. And Oba Chakarisa was in his place, and he issued a letter. Jet streams grounded, all of them. 16 aircraft on the ground. Now what do you do? So those are the kind of challenges that we've been through. I think you just have to persevere. I don't think it's wise to fight the CAA. You can't fight them. You've got to work with them. They are the regulator, and they are vigorous. I often look at them and I think that they're a little bit too vigorous. By the way, we've just been through an ICAO audit now. We did the previous ICAO audit, Elink, did the previous ICAO audit whenever it was, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, whenever it was. We've just done the ICAO audit with the CAA now. And zero findings. Clean. Zero findings. It's not the only thing is South Africa was 91% compliant with ICAO. After this audit, I think they're now 95% compliant. Guess what the FAA is?
45.
It's about 65. But we as an organization are 95% compliant. Now you have to look at reality and practicality. 95% is not sustainable. Not for an emerging economy like South Africa. You've got to be a little bit more accommodating. You've got to work as the civil aviation, the regulator. You've got to work with industry.
The saying that you can't fight with City Hall, you won't win if you fight with City Hall, is certainly applicable here.
Yeah, very much so.
All right.
But Karl, before you jump to the next question, you talk about operations and the difficulty of operating in different countries. That in itself becomes a challenge, and some of the biggest hurdles we've had to overcome is aircraft recoveries where things have happened outside of the country. And aside from that, you've always got the geopolitical side of it, the aeropolitical side of it, and things are different. It's very easy to get a foreign operator's permit issued by South Africa. It costs something like 500 Rand. But if you try and get a foreign operator's permit to operate in and out of a place like Rwanda, you could be in for $20,000. and that you'd have to renew every year. So things are not just that easy to operate outside of South Africa, intra-Africa. But that's just on the normal ops, normal side. When things go wrong, you've got even bigger hurdles. So a couple of instances come to mind. One of them was the deer marabou stork in Kasane. I don't know if those pictures were circulated, but a marabou stork went right into the avionics bay. I mean, literally pierced the skin of the aircraft right into the avionics bay and ended up on the lap of the first officer, literally taking out all of the avionics on an Embraer 135 at Kasane on takeoff, on climb out, in fact. So instrumentation and this crippled aeroplane managed to get it back onto the ground in Kasane, craft out of Kasane, hurt. Another one. But the interesting thing is it took within 6 months runway excursion into the runway end safety area, and that took us days, if not weeks, to get the aircraft pulled out of the mud, cleaned up, inspected, and then brought back into the country for a proper inspection. Literally nothing wrong with the aircraft, but it takes a long time. We just had an Embraer just a week ago take it in Nairobi, and Van Blade shipped them up there, get an engineer, get through customs on the international side of the airport, and that took about a week to get the aircraft out of Nairobi back into Johannesburg again. So it happens all the time, and
Oh, sure.
and airliners confronted by those kinds of challenges, but you still have to run your schedule because you've got commitments. So you can just imagine that it's not that easy. Interesting, and talk Sol. Sol Island is still not far off the African continent. Try St. Helena.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's another challenge you have.
Yeah.
Right.
No, St. Helena is fascinating, and I mean, we've been operating it now since I think 2017, somewhere around there, maybe even a bit earlier than that. And it's this rock in the middle of the ocean, kind of midway between the west coast of Namibia and the east coast of Brazil. And the weather patterns there can change very, very quickly. You've got this runway which is built on top of the rock about 1,000 feet above sea level, and on the one side there's a cliff down to the ocean, and on the other side there's a cliff down to the ocean, and that's it. A little bit like Krugersdorp, just
It's a little bigger. The runway's wider.
just a bit more windy than Krugersdorp. Not much longer. It's not much longer, but just a bit more windy. And the challenge is that the way the breezes over the ocean flow over this rock, you can have it in one direction on the one threshold and in a completely different direction on the other threshold. So, I mean, that's it. But also it can be overcome by fog, literally within
very
minutes.
limited length runway too.
Yeah, very much so. So the Embraer is perfect for that. The E2 would also be perfect, but we've got the E1190s are our E1190s, not all of them, but most of them are E-tops. So it's an E-tops operation. But it's fascinating, and you can imagine if you don't get it right, where you're going to go. Apparently they do, yeah. No, but the thing is that, you get to points of no return, and, when we get to Namibia and Swakopmund is the place where we refuel, and then, you finally dispatch from there, and if you dispatch from there, you get to the point of no return, you carry on. And because there's no other alternative to it, when you get there and you do missed approaches, you can't do missed approaches and then still make it to Ascension. It's just not enough fuel. Just on St. Helena, before you do move on, I don't want to, I may be speaking a little bit out of turn here, because I don't do the operation, but what I do know is it's very, very challenging. And, you write on the numbers all the time.
Sure.
And, to get the right perspective on it, I'm not qualified to give that perspective. But yeah, I've given a couple of views on it.
You described it so well when you said it's a rock that sticks out and the wind blows around the rock, so you can get opposite direction winds on the same runway.
Yes.
And dangerous.
And you also get the rock formation funnels the wind. So if you see what's on the threshold and what's in the middle, it's very different, and the intensities can be quite different as well. Anyway, but I mean, St. Helena, we can get chief pilot of Airlink, Johan, to come and chat, or to the head of operations, Jaco, he can come and have a chat about.
Would love to have that.
St. Helena. So that might be something that you want to put on one of your next things, because St. Helena is a very special operation.
Rodger, I just wanted to know about how you got involved with Embraer. And as I understand it, you are the world's largest operator of Embraer aircraft. You were given a special award or something.
Oh, okay. We talk about the special award, and no, we're not the largest operator of Embraers. I think one of the American airlines is a bigger operator of Embraers than we are. I think we have 75 now, James. I think is that, yeah. I think it's 75, and I think that when we take delivery of the aircraft that are still coming, we will have a fleet of 82 within the next 2 years. And of those,
Incredible.
27 are Embraer 135-140s, and all the rest are E-jets. And the last 10 of them are E2 E-jets. So we're not the biggest in the world. We are the biggest in Africa, Europe, and Middle East, if you categorize that as an area. Biggest operator of Embraers. And it's an all Embraer fleet. And you ask, how did we get into it? We adjudicated what was available at the time. We stepped into the 37-seat mark. We could have gone with Dornier 328. We could have gone with the CRJ. We could have gone with Embraer. And we're very happy to have chosen Embraer. We chose the 135 because of hot and high performance. Because if you look at the 145 LR, that was before the XR came about, it is hot and high and paired at OR Tambo. So if you want to go anywhere, you can go with a full load, but you can't go far. Whereas with the 135, you can practically take a full load in the 135 and you can go its full payload range. So that's why we chose it, and we have no regrets having chosen it. It's still, in our view, the most robust OEM for regional aircraft, and Airlink is, after all, a regional aircraft operator. So yeah, I think that's it. As regards the award that you talk about, the Southern Cross, so that was conferred on me in, I think it was 2021 or 22, somewhere around there. I can't remember the exact date, by the Brazilian government, President Bolsonaro. Only the second time it's been issued to a South African. Sorry, no, second time. The previous one was Judge L.B. Sachs. Sorry, third one, because there was Judge L.B. Sachs, President Thabo Mbeki, and then myself. And what it was all about is the role that Airlink played in conjunction with Embraer, a Brazilian company, in connecting people and places throughout Southern Africa using a Brazilian product. That was what it was about, yeah.
Fantastic with it. Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you.
With your 84 airplanes that you mentioned, what is your complement, staff complement of Airlink?
So it's 2,700 odd at the moment. It's still growing. We obviously have this little situation happening in Iran at the moment, and I think it's just put the brakes on a few things because of the price of fuel, which went up 232% since the end of February. I'm talking about Jet A1. Funnily enough, diesel for trucks and cars went up 74%, petrol by about 60-odd%, but Jet A1 232%. So there's an inquiry underway. I don't believe that you can have diesel, which comes from the same crack of the barrel as Jet A1, diesel going up 74%, but Jet A1 going up 232%. So it's been a little bit of an impediment. Staff will continue. At one point we had 400 pilots. I think we're down a little bit at the moment to about 370 pilots in Airlink. From time to time we've lost pilots to the Far East, to the Middle East, and so on and so forth. And although the Middle East is not recruiting at the moment, we're pretty sure that will change probably in about 18 months from now. So we're looking at the beginning of the conduit. I was fascinated to see you only have 27 young members of EAA. I think Paul was saying it's 27 young members.
The young aviators.
Young aviators.
Branch.
Is it? Okay, because that's something that we need to think about in this country. South Africa is a recognized source of highly qualified pilots. So if you think about, my daughter Michaela, for example, you spoke about her earlier on. She did time in the little 172 RG, and then into the Cessna Caravans, and then into the ERJ 135 right-hand seat, and then became P1, and then she moved into the E-Jet, P2, and then P1, and then spent some time in command, built up a whole lot of command times, and became highly sought after, and went off to the Middle East. So now she's flying at Air Japan in a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And that story applies to so many youngsters that can come into the beginning of the conduit and pop out at the other end of it, like Michaela, and go and fly for any one of the Far Eastern airlines. They all love South African pilots. So does Qatar, so does Emirates,
Yeah.
Etihad. They all love our South African pilots.
That's terrific. I
And Cathay.
yeah, always say that I am so grateful for the training that we had
Yeah.
in SAA specifically. Jeepers, it was intense all the time. So the standard was pretty good. I see that 43 Air School have got 440 live-in students at the moment.
And probably 2% of them are South African.
Yeah, they said there's a lot of spicy food served there.
It's look. I mean, obviously that's a commercial business, and they're going to enroll people who are going to pay. End of story.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I think that it's a travesty that there are not more South African youngsters that are enrolling to become pilots. I mean, pilots are highly sought after all over the world. And yes, it goes through these ebbs and flows of demand and supply. But I think at the end of it, it's a good career, a great profession, and it's precise. So, and it's got prestige attached to it as well.
I had a question that I wanted to ask. We had an opportunity to go to the Airlink facility, and we saw it was a massive production of the airplanes. We took a tour around the training center. It was quite amazing. And my question is, I have two questions basically. We heard that when flying to St. Helena, two captains are supposed to fly that aircraft to St. Helena. Is it going to be something for the longer period, or maybe first officers are going to be allowed as well to fly to St. Helena, Airlink?
So if I understand your question, are you saying is it always going to be a two-captain operation?
Sir.
Yes.
Right. Then the
And
second,
it's not, it is such a specific requirement and such high risk that you have to mitigate the risk by having very competent flight deck crew. So, the best way you can mitigate that is by having two highly expertised, because expertise comes from skill. You have a lot of people with skill and experience.
Correct.
So you put those two together to get to the expertise. So it's the expertise that gets measured and then graded, and only those highly expertised two crew captains will fly to St. Helena. And it's been like that for a long time, and it's not going to change.
yeah, because we did a sim tour, then we did fly to St. Helena, and it was amazing. Then the other thing, when
You flew that in what, the Embraer 190 simulator?
Yes, sir, we
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Then the other thing, when it comes to the E2s, are you planning to increase the fleet of the E2s?
When you talk about planning, planning is always on a step-by-step basis, and you have to be responsible. You can't just come up with an infinite plan and then hope that you can implement it, because you're always going to have what I call black swan events, like what's happening in Iran and what happened with COVID,
Yes.
and so on. So you've got to plan and implement in bite-sized chunks, so that you can accept that. And I have this principle called agility and absorption. So the absorption part of it is your financial wherewithal that you can afford to do that adventure of being able to continuously grow a business and expand into new horizons. Your agility is to be able to respond to market opportunities, like what happened during COVID. You've got to be able to jump into that gap if the gap materializes, but you can't jump into the gap unless you've got the absorption.
True.
So the absorption is your balance sheet, and the ability to convert the balance sheet into liquidity. We can talk about that till the cows come home, but yes, that's what it's all about. So
Yes.
are we planning more? I'm sure more will happen,
Correct.
but 10 is a good number to start with, and we want to let that exercise bed down. There is a risk associated with the E2, and it's about the gear turbofan. So we have to make sure that we mitigate that risk as best we possibly can. And the bigger you get into the aircraft, if that risk manifests in some way or the other as a problem,
Yes.
you've got to be careful that the problem doesn't take your business out. So that's the reason why they're 10 out of 82.
Roger, with your 2,700 or people, with about average of about 5 dependents each, or,
Yeah, I think
some
direct, yeah, that's correct. But there's downstream as well. If I take a look at downstream, the supply chain, and I'm talking about local, you're probably talking about 10,000 more, because you can normally multiply your 2,700 by about 4.5, 5.
Yeah.
So There's about 10,000 more, each with 5. So, the fraternity that has become dependent on that business Airlink is quite large. And that's really, if you talk about, what motivated through my 33 and a half years career at Airlink, it was really all about that. I think when you go back to COVID, COVID was tough, I think, for everybody, every business, not just airlines, but every business. COVID was tough. But the one thing that I can say about Airlink and the people of Airlink is they stuck together like glue. They remained fully committed. They shared the burden of their hardships collectively. We didn't make one job redundant, not one person.
Wonderful. It only goes because of leadership. Enthusiasm of the leader and honesty.
Just before you move off scale, Karl, Airlink today, we've been a little bit more active. We've been up to 85,000 flights a year. So we run about 83,000 flights a year at the moment. We cut back a little bit, obviously, because of where we're at with Iran.
From 85,000 to 83,000, what is that, about a 4% cut? Nothing.
I don't have my mathematical brain active at the moment, but There we go,
Rodger, when you had the most amazing relationship with Barry Webb, and you made a heck of a statement to me about when you left Airlink as an executive director. You handed the key.
Yeah. Well, retirement out of your passion is not an easy thing to do.
I know.
But at the same time, you've got processes and procedures which don't come along coincidentally. They take a lot of effort, a lot of commitment, and a lot of time to in place. And one of them is you've got an HR policy, and the HR policy says when you get to retirement age, you step down and you hand over to the next generation, and they move up, and so it goes on. One of the missions as the chief executive of a business like Airlink is to make sure that every facet of the company is driven by the processes and the procedures. Part of it is your HR, and within the HR is succession planning. And succession planning of a chief executive and your C-suite does not come like that. It takes a long time. Now, we had a guy who was one of the Coronation non-executive directors on the board of Airlink in 2005. His name is de Villiers Engelbrecht. And he left Coronation and he went off to the steel business. But in the relationship that we built while he was non-executive director, and often coming to dig around in the company to check to see that we were always compliant with international financial reporting systems and so on and so forth. From a finance perspective, we interacted a lot, and I recognized the capabilities and the capacities of de Villiers. When he was in the steel business, he would give me a call about once a week, telling me how dismal the steel industry is, and how upset he is, and disappointed he is, and unhappy he is. And one day I said to him, listen, there must be a reason why you keep on badgering me about your plight in life. Why don't you come back to the airline business? Start at a high level, but not necessarily C-suite, but climb into the commercial aspects of the business, financial aspects of the business. And he agreed to do that 14, 15 years ago. Became the financial director, and then we is not me, being the chief executive, I also report to a board of directors and to a remuneration committee and audit finance committee, and. So I put his name up and I said, look, you've got to have more than one succession plan, but here is a person who I believe over time, once he gets general management experience, is the right person. Now I'm using him as an example, because if you take a look at the C-suite that has been left behind at Airlink, these are highly skilled, highly capable, highly educated individuals, all capable of taking that business into its next iteration, if I could call it that, led by de Villiers. So I think if there's one thing that I felt accomplished about was the emplacement of a complete succession plan, that when it was my turn to step out, I could do so with the comfort and the knowledge that the team that was going to take Airlink into the future was highly competent, highly capable, and I'd say today the best airline executive team in the country by far. That's what's been left behind. But before we move off that topic, what was it like? You know, I was kind of in tune with the concept already from around about 2022. So I'm 70 now. I know sometimes people say, no, you're not 70, but yes, I am. And the policy says 65. And yes, you can allow people to dwell for a little bit longer than 65, and we have. I mean, we had Dave Vermaak, who was there until 72. He was a guy who grew up at South African Airways, and he retired out of there, and he joined us. He was there until 72, and we've still got people that are in the company that should have retired a lot earlier. But you've got to lead by example as well. And you can only do that with a succession plan. So my succession plan was in place for me to step out already in 2002. But then, of course, COVID happened, 2000, 2001. And the board took a look at it and said, Rodger, you can't step down now, even if you want to. So I said, well, I actually don't want to. But I will, because the policy says I shall. So I could have, should have stepped out earlier. It wasn't the right time. Also, you want to step out at a time where the business is on a high. And, you know, fortuitously, we were able to capitalize on all of the opportunities, and I can name them one by one. Sometimes I've become a little bit emotional, like Namibia was disconnected from the world through COVID, but for Airlink. It was the only airline providing services in and out of Namibia, connecting Namibia. And I don't just mean Windhoek, I mean Swakopmund, Walvis Bay as well. The only airline that connected Namibia with the world was Airlink through COVID. So those are the kind of opportunities that helped Airlink to regain momentum, recover a lot of what we lost to South African Airways with that 890 million loss, and, you know, turn the airline into a sustainable, viable, profitable business that is robust and reliable going into the future. And that was the time when it was right for me to step down. It's very difficult when you in the office 6:30 every morning and you leave it at 7 o'clock every night, and you don't have a lunch on, you don't have tea breaks and whatever. You know, you committed passionately to that business because it's your everything in life. Then you step down and you think, okay, fine, now what am I going to do? I still get up at 20 to 5 every morning, and I still sit on the board of Airlink, so there's that. And I'm still a significant shareholder, as I've said. I'm the chairman of the board of a little industrial company in Jet Park. I'm on the board of an American airline called JSX out of Dallas. I'm on the board of a property developing business in Knysna, and I'm a stakeholder in that as well. And I do some pro bono, I do some coaching of 2 or 3 individuals, and I'm on the board of a pro bono entity, an industry representative body called ASATA, the Association of Southern African Travel Advisors. So yeah, keeps me a bit busy. And I also like cleaning my cars, by the way. So, you know, there's a lot to do.
Rodger, you're actually a legend, and you are ensuring that that legend stays alive for quite a while to come. When you said that you've got to build, the mark of a good leader is somebody who ensures that there's succession of somebody good. And your pal, Engelbrecht, is the man.
Yeah, he's highly capable. We've got different leadership styles.
Sure.
You know, have to recognize that no 2 leaders are identical. But you've got to find a leadership style that is going to fit within the overarching leadership group. You know, no one man is a business. The business is the people in the business. There are 2,700 people. And, you know, an airline is a very, very sophisticated business.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about facets which, you know, if you take each individual facet on its own, a lot of people wouldn't understand it. You know, like the flight operational aspect of it is one, the aircraft technical aspect of it. Just imagine tracking and tracing the components on 82 aircraft, all operating collectively 83,000 flights a year. You know, how do you do that? And how do you plan the next maintenance events on each and every one of those aircraft?
You can't use a cardiac system.
Not the cardiac system, no. I think AI has played a massive role when you think about just one thing, revenue management, revenue optimization, you've got 83,000 flights and each of them sits with seat inventory. And I don't know how many seats that amounts to. It's probably 10,000 seats a year, whatever it might be, maybe more. You've got 10,000 seats to sell and you want to sell them at the optimized value. So from an airline perspective, if you don't optimize your revenue, you're not going to be in business. Without AI, forget about it. There's no human who will understand that algorithm. So there's that aspect of it. Bringing it all together is in itself a complicated issue. And it's a people business. So it's, any business is a people business, but this is more intensely a people business because at the end of the day, every person in that business is subservient to your customer. You're there for that customer and you've got to deliver the service to the customer on time performance, but it's got to be a memorable experience. That's what it's all about.
Putting so much faith or confidence in the people must be one of the greatest reasons of your success. You're infecting them with your enthusiasm and where you respect each one for what their contribution is, instead of them being regarded just as numbers.
I think if there's one thing that one can impart to your leadership team is whatever you do, just do it with passion. Full commitment with your dedication, but it's got to come organically from within you. You've got to want to do it. Karl, I often get asked that question, so what was it like going to work? I never went to work. I didn't work. I just had fun. It was just allowing this passion just to lead me to wherever, whatever. And by the way, I was also in the complaints business. Because the complaints department was me. I was the complaints department.
The buck stops there.
That's it.
I've said it not, and I say it jokingly, but I mean it. But I don't actually do it. Is get into the cupboard occasionally with a vacuum cleaner so I can feel like I'm in the crew rest of a 747. And then just to make it more realistic, my wife bangs around in the dressing room like the crew did in the galley and gives me cold tea every 2 hours.
Okay.
and if when I tell her, she says, I've heard this 1,000 times, but I don't. Rodger, unfortunately, we're getting into the lunch hour, and I know that a lot of people have planned on this being only about 2 hours. It has been absolutely fascinating and wonderful, wonderful. And I think Maury has got a little token for you. Incidentally, do you know that Maury is the vice chairman of the ERA Club of South Africa? Rodger, this is to help you navigate through life.
Sorry, Rodger, I thought about buying you a bottle of wine, and then I thought maybe one bottle of wine is not enough to drink after you've been here with us for a morning. So there's a couple of bottles in here. Hope you enjoy them.
Thank you, Maury. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet. I spoke to Rob Jonkers, who extended his apologies for not being here, but he also contributed to some small thing in here from EAA, and I hope you will use it in conjunction with that lot there.
Can I look?
Yeah, sure.
No, it's like one of these that's got lots and lots of wrappers on it.
No, that's not a trick. It was just to make it look pretty for the audience.
Well, it's very kind of you all, and it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to be here today with you. Oh,
coasters.
Fantastic. Thank you. They'll be in my Neisner bar.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Karl.
Thanks so much, Rodger.
It's been so much fun, I must say. Thank you.
Time has been just absolutely invaluable here and spending it with us. It's really an honor for all of us to have listened to you this morning.
Thank you, Rodger. Really excellent. I mean, I just have no words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
I mean, these type of platforms is really important, particularly for you guys, the youngsters up there. It's always good to have you guys here as well. And I think that, everyone just benefits from this type of experience. And so, thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.